Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Welcome to the print soft cover. We have with us somebody who needs no introduction, Mr. Rajneesh Kumar. He was at the helm of the State Bank of India for 3 years from 2017 to 2020, which also coincides with perhaps one of the most tumultuous periods of Indian banking in recent years. What with the collapse of Yes Bank, Jet Airways, demonetization and inching close to the pandemic which hit us in 2020. And Mr. Kumar has penned down, has chronicled all of this in his new book, The Custodian of Trust, A Banker's Memoir. I have a copy with me, which I will just unveil for our viewers now. That's the book. So to begin with, correct me if I'm wrong, but you are, from what I know, the first SBI chairman to actually document your experience over the years in the form of a book. When did you start the process? When did you know that, this is something that needs to be put down, and perhaps it would also be something that several bankers would learn over the years to come? When did you start that process?
So one that earlier, Mr. Kakotkar, who was the chairman, he has written his autobiography.
Okay.
And I think it was published somewhere around 2005 or 2006.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. And as far as the thought is concerned, of course, once I was having a conversation with Suhail Seth in one of the social events, and he said that there has been so much work done in SBI, you should pen it down. But of course, at that time, a thought came to my mind, and then because I was busy with all that, what was happening in the bank, so we didn't get a chance. But once my term got completed on 7th October 2020, and then we were in COVID period.
Right.
So then I thought that maybe it is better that I can use this time. Right. And let me try to write down about what all has happened. And that is how it all started. And it.
The title of the book is also very interesting, The Custodian of Trust, which means that the institution really embodies a lot more than just simply being at the helm of Indian banking, not at the helm of Indian banking, but basically the flag bearer of Indian banks. Can you explain the philosophy behind the title of it?
Because, that banking, it is a business of trust. When you are placing your money with the bank, there is a certain trust which you carry in the bank, and you are able to part with your money. Otherwise, you will not give even 100 rupees to somebody. And with the bank, people keep their lakhs or even crores of rupees with the bank because they trust the bank. So that's why the title was kept as The Custodian of Trust. Of course, the idea came from the publisher, I must admit it. But I like the idea. And that's how it actually covers the subject. As I said, that banking is all about trust and nothing else.
And the first two chapters directly delve into two of the most crucial events, perhaps during your tenure as chairman, which is the collapse of Yes Bank and Jet Airways. And your book reveals, I'm talking about Yes Bank first, that it had sort of become a lender as the last resort to companies who were in troubled waters, and these sort of deals were shrouded in ambiguity. Can you elaborate a little bit for our viewers on this?
Essentially, what was happening that this is what I observed, that whenever there was a company which would find it a bit difficult to raise money from the other lenders, then they were able to negotiate and get loans many times from the Yes Bank. And that's why I have mentioned in my book that they became lender of the last resort. And I have given a live example also that how the funding or the financial closure, not the actual funding, but the financial closure in respect of financing of Mumbai International Airport was achieved by the promoters. So that is just one example, but there were many others. And that is where it was a high risk strategy, and ultimately bank ran into trouble.
And Yes Bank was also the most rapid reconstruction of a private bank in the shortest, amount of time. And also it gathered a lot of foreign interest as well. What did this deal, what did the reconstruction mean for the Indian banking sector in general? And if you could just gloss over the highlights a little bit.
You mean Yes Bank's growth story?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, no, the bank has started very fine. In fact, it's a good brand, good franchise, good customer service, good technology, and it became the fourth largest bank in the country, and a recognizable brand. Yes Bank. Wherever you go, you could see their logos, their signage, and particularly customer service was very good. That is the general feedback about their customer service. Technology platform was also and continues to be, in fact, a very good technology platform. Initially, it is started with a lot of focus on bringing in new ways of financing the agriculture sector. And Rabobank, they had some collaboration with Rabobank. Somewhere down the line, I think around 2013 or 14 probably, the focus of the bank changed, and then the corporate lending book, it started growing. And then, as I mentioned, that some high risk accounts came to the bank books of the bank, and that is where it ran into trouble. But otherwise, initially it was a strong retail bank.
Right. And the whole process of basically recapitalizing the bank and the foreign interest in it, and the way this deal was basically clinched at breakneck speed almost. And in a way, in hindsight, you know that you were racing against time, because then there was a lockdown which was not foreseen at that time, but it would have really created more chaos, in the whole process. So if you could talk about how that was made possible to, finalize something as complex in such a short time.
Yeah. So one was, of course, like when RBI put the bank into moratorium, and then, of course, there were some discussions already initiated with the state bank that state bank will have to step in and play its role in reviving this bank. And then State Bank alone would not have been able to rescue the bank. So that is where it was decided that other private sector banks, other investors, they should chip in. And the requirement of the capital was much higher. It was almost assessed anywhere between 22 to 25,000 crore.
Okay.
But foreign investors, obviously, they needed more time for due diligence and getting the approval. And then because the time was short, and Reserve Bank of India was also very keen that when they declared their results, which was on 13th of March 2020. So when they declare the result, by that time, the new capital should be in. And then a decision was taken that, okay, instead of full capital of 22 or 25,000 crore, we will go with half of that amount. And then the target became 10,000 crore. And then most of the investment then in the first round, it was kept amongst the Indian banks, State Bank and the other private sector banks. SBI from the public sector space, State Bank was the only bank. Other banks, they had their own issues and were not in a position to spare any capital.
Right.
And then the residual capital, it was raised in the second round. But I think in hindsight, it proved to be a right decision. And because then we had the lockdown situation, and if we had delayed it, then there would have been a problem. But we had no inkling of the lockdown when this decision was taken. It was more to do with the date of declaration of their results, which were already delayed. And that's how it all happened.
So your second chapter dedicates, I mean, it's completely dedicated to the fall of Jet Airways and the various efforts that were involved in reviving it. And as you have described in the book in minute details, there was also a lot of drama with there being trust issues between Etihad and Jet, and Naresh Goyal was being stubborn about wanting to hold on to his company, and the lenders just seemed more keen about seeing the deal through. What were the major issues with Jet?
The major problem with the JAD resolution was that both the promoters were not on the same page. And because there was mistrust between the two, it made the task of finding a solution and an amiable solution, it became very difficult, and lenders put in a lot of effort, particularly State Bank of India, that it continues to fly. And in case of an airline, because once it starts losing cash, then keep it up and running for a long time becomes very difficult. And solution has to be found very, very quickly. And unfortunately, that could not happen. And eventually, the airline had to be grounded. But if both the promoters could see an eye to each other, then probably it could have been revived. Or alternatively, if there was a very strong authority with the powers, like in case of banks, Reserve Bank has all the powers to resolve and find a solution to a failed institution or institution which is in trouble. Look, then it would have been a different story. And that's why in one case we were successful, in the other case we were not.
Okay, all right. So do you believe that Jet 2.0 can fly again now that this year there have been more developments?
I hope so, because there is no legal hurdle as of now. The issue is all around the DGCA comfort about the capability of the new management. And running an airline is a risky business. So they have to take care of all the aspects, and then availability of slots. There is a process to allot the slots at the airport. So if these issues are sorted out, then hopefully in the summers of 2022, we should be able to make a beginning. But still, it is just a hope.
Okay, that's optimistic.
Yes.
So demonetization was, not just for SBI, but for the entire country in some ways, the most disruptive event, one of the most disruptive events of the past few years. And you say that even the RBI was caught off guard. And in your book, you have, in hindsight, written about a lot of things that could have been perhaps planned in anticipation of the event. Can you talk about that a little bit for our viewers?
In the book, I've tried to cover that. What were the logistical challenges which the bankers and Reserve Bank had to face? Whether it could have been planned better, it's a bit difficult question to answer, because when confidentiality has to be maintained around an issue like demonetization, not many people can be involved, and particularly the people who have ears to the ground. Because if you involve too many people, then you can't maintain the secrecy and the confidentiality.
Right.
So that is why all these challenges arose. But I would say that RBI was very proactive in responding to the situation. And because nowadays, another challenge which comes up is because all these systems, they run on technology. And you have to rewrite the rules every time there is a change. And that also became an issue. Then the size of the cassette in ATMs, that was a big issue. So there are many learnings. So I thought that at least I should document them in my book, and should in future any such situation again arise, at least there would be learnings documented.
There are learnings, yes. But in your opinion, what did demonetization exactly achieve now that the dust has settled?
So basically, formalization of economy is one. And the way the people on the ground that I mentioned in my book also, because I went and met and interacted with the people who were standing in the queue, they saw it as a fight against the
black money.
Now, whether we have achieved or not achieved that objective, only history will tell. Sometimes these are the issues on which a judgment can be passed only after, say, 10 or 20 years.
Okay.
Even 3 or 5 years period may be too short a period to pass a judgment. And the case in point, I would say, is 91 reforms. And we know there was huge resistance to 91 reforms.
Right.
But today we evaluate, then we find that if India had not initiated those reforms, we would not have achieved the economic progress we have achieved today. So the economic decisions of this kind, which have very wide ramifications, their impact, or what was the impact on the society or on the economics, I think we need a longer period to judge.
Okay. Basically, too early to tell.
Yeah.
And, you know, in terms of NPLs also, you've put the situation of bankers and, you know, how the failure was constantly being attributed to the banking system. And you've put them in very interesting words that, you know, you are damned if you do and you are damned if you don't, which is true. But, you know, how has the whole NPL crisis made bankers extra cautious now, extra wary? Because even when we speak to the micro and medium industries, and they're struggling to get loans today. I mean, generally, what is the sentiment of the banking system now after the entire crisis?
So one is that the problem was always with the corporate loan. The problem of NPL with the SMEs, it was always a manageable problem, even if in terms of percentage, the NPL in SME book were and traditionally have been higher for the public sector banks. And the availability of credit to SME has always been an issue. You see, there have been n number of committees in the last 20-25 years about how to improve the flow of credit to SMEs. And despite so many committees, so many recommendations, so many steps, it has not improved. But rather, I am more optimistic now because of the technology which is coming in, and a lot of platforms are coming up which are taking care of financing to SMEs. So what the committees could not do, probably the technology would achieve. But when we talk about the risk aversion, definitely in terms of funding for the projects, the bankers are much more cautious, there's no doubt. And they have to be cautious, because if you have not learned your lessons after losing so much money, then it is of no use. So it cannot be business as usual what it was. But SME lending, I would not attribute to what we saw as a result of what is called asset quality review. But the chapter on NPLs, I've tried to put in perspective that what a banker feels about it. And when we are talking about the large corporate loans becoming NPLs, the entire ecosystem, which has to share the responsibility, including the bankers. I'm not excluding the bankers. I'm not saying that I'm not responsible, bankers are not responsible, everybody else. That is not the case if you read that chapter. But at the same time, we cannot say only bankers are responsible and nobody else has any responsibility.
Right.
It is the entire ecosystem which contributes to the NPLs as far as the corporate sector is concerned.
You know, ever since you took over as chairman of SBI, in all earnings calls, analyst calls, you've always lamented that the analysts and markets were not giving fair value to the SBI. What is your view now? How have things panned out?
Things have changed. They are definitely much better than what they were in earlier years. Market has started recognizing the value of State Bank of India. But if you go by one indicator, which is price to earning multiples, so still we don't get the same multiples as the private sector gets. But given the size of the business which SBI has and its dominant position, and the steps it has taken to clean up its books, and the digitization of the processes. So I believe that there is no reason that SBI should be at a discount to its private sector peers. But that is like analysts and the investors to decide. This is my view that it should be at par with anybody else in terms of funding multiples.
Right. And last question, sir. But you were the first SBI chairman to bring in a work-life balance policy, and that too in an institution where there has been years of perception that long hours equal to higher productivity. How has your intervention changed the work culture?
So one, it is a very large institution, and whatever you do, it is always very difficult that across the organization things happen. But definitely there was a very sincere attempt where the personal life or the family life of the employees, that was, I tried to take care of that aspect. And it did receive a very good response from the people down the line. And this was something which became a talking point in the bank. And I won't say that I would have achieved 100% success, but still, this was something which touched the emotional chord with the employees, and it was helpful in keeping them motivated and de-stress the organization.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us today at the Print Soft Cover. And to our viewers, thank you so much for watching.